Okay, we'll get started now. So welcome back, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our next session on distribution system modeling. So this session is sponsored by Navius Research. So I encourage you all to connect with Navius team members. So we have Francisca Foerg and Michael Wallenetz, who spoke on the first panel yesterday. So thank you to Navius for their continued support and making this event possible. So now I'd like to introduce our chair of this session, so Julia McNally, and the session 6 panelists to join us on stage, as you already are. Amazing. So Julia McNally is the Director of Climate Action at Toronto Hydro, where she leads a team helping customers decarbonize. She previously spent 14 years practicing administrative law before joining the Ontario Power Authority as Director of Market Transformation. And importantly, Julia is also a member of the EMH Advisory Board, which is great. So please join me in welcoming Julia McNally and the panelists.
All right. Welcome to your afternoon session. No, morning. What is it? I don't know. Not even jet lagged, train lagged. It's just, Eduardo, it's been so intensely interesting. I don't know where we are in time. But I do know where we are in electricity space. So we've spent the last day and a bit in the rarefied heights of energy modeling in the bulk system. And now we are coming down to reality at the distribution system where the rubber hits the road. And I do know, having spent many years at the IESO, that at the bulk system, we tend to assume away the distribution system. Maybe we put a little dollar amount, but mostly we ignore it. And we ignore it at our peril. If we want to succeed at the energy transition, we need to have the distribution system there and evolving. So I really am grateful to Edouard for always including a distribution system panel in this great conference. What I want to do is just highlight some of the challenges that we're seeing at the distribution system that our Fine Four panelists will touch on in their talks. And some of the new challenges, the utility sector is good at growing. We've been doing it for the last 100 years. We have experience dealing with peaks. We've also been dealing with that for the last 100 years. But we see at the distribution sector, we see 3 new challenges with the transition. And these won't be new to anybody here, but let me just highlight them. So the first is the increased uncertainty around the extent and the pace of growth is a challenge for us. Historically, at the distribution level, we've used econometric modeling, more deterministic techniques, and we're seeing the need to move to more stochastic techniques. Second, and I was just discussing this with the panelists, we are seeing the bidirectional flows are super exciting, but they bring actual physical impacts around short circuit capacity, feeder stability, thermal limits. And I'm not sure we have our arms around the implication of that for the system physically or for costs. And third, we're still understanding the cost-benefit analysis around non-wires. And I feel the need to make a bit of a pitch for wires. Wires are fantastic and they're cheap and we need them. So yes, we need to understand non-wires, but let's not throw away the wires. They're super important. So those are 3 of the challenges we're seeing. Our panelists today are going to touch on facets of that, and then I look forward to more discussion about it. So we're going to go in order of Stefan, Luis, Charles, and then Koen. I can tell you these panelists are fantastic, and if you want to know more about them and their CVs, please go look on the website. We're gonna go in a bit of a different direction for the intros. So we're going to start with Stefan, who works at Clean Energy Canada. And instead of his bio, I'm going to talk to you about what makes him hopeful. So Stefan says not a lot. So what Stefan has been doing is imagining a world that would make him hopeful, and I think he integrates that into the work he does. So Stefan, please make us hopeful. Come on up.
Thanks, Julia. So I want to provide some context, basically, to ground this session and the panel conversation. We at Clean Energy Canada have recently published a white paper on distributed energy resources. It's basically a plain language guide on what they are and how they work. So feel free to check that out. It's on our website. My presentation, so it's going to be a brief primer on DERs and their potential. And I'm actually not so much going to talk about the distribution level, actually. So I'm going to highlight some results from a case study in BC that we've been doing and we're about to finalize. And those are preliminary modeling results that I'm going to share. But first, let's talk a little bit more about DERs and their role. So demand for electricity is growing around the world. And the IEA has referred to this phenomenon. I'm sure everybody has heard it as the age of electricity. Also here in Canada, pretty much every province is projecting a significant increase in electricity demand in the coming years. And this demand growth is promoting a fundamental rethink of our electricity grids. And one of the most significant opportunities in this evolution lies on the customer side. The increasing electrification of households, businesses, and industry, combined with smart digital systems, creates the potential for a demand-sized resource at a new scale. This slide shows an energy smart home, but there are opportunities for DERs across residential, industrial, and commercial customers. There are three types of DERs on the bottom right of the slide. You can see them. So demand management is, for example, managed EV charging, smart thermostats for space and water heating controls. Then we have distributed generation, rooftop solar, and when you pair that with battery storage, it becomes dispatchable. And another distributed form of storage would be bidirectional EV charging, for example. I should note that sometimes in this space, people often talk about DERs or some related terminology, non-wireless alternatives, and they might not all be the same, obviously. But I think sometimes it's more necessary to be more precise than just using one of these terms and really differentiate what kind of DER are we talking about exactly, what kind of technology, because the extent to which a utility can leverage them actually differs by resource. So why are DERs interesting for consumers or utilities? For consumers, they can help reduce energy bills. In the previous panel, a colleague from BC mentioned, rate impacts are a big thing for politicians and for ratepayers. For grid operators and utilities, DERs can be brought together as virtual power plants or VPPs, and aggregating them into a virtual power plant can help shape the grid demand in different ways, which you can see on the slide. And that in turn can help reduce the need for investment in traditional generation, transmission, and distribution. And that in turn, like I said, can help make rates more affordable than they would otherwise be. That can also contribute to grid reliability and resilience. And in places where fossil fuel generation has traditionally been used to meet peak demand, it can also reduce greenhouse gas emissions and local air pollution. So this is a framework that we have developed, a framework of analysis to take stock of where things are at right now in the DER and VPP space in Canada. And to realize the benefits of these resources, work needs to be advanced in several areas, but it really starts with understanding the potential of DERs. And by that I mean quantifying the potential that DERs and understand the scale of the opportunity. But understanding this potential of DERs is still very much in its infancy in Canada. Some provinces have studied DERs to varying degrees, and some of them have published their assessments, so they have become public. Ontario has been a front runner in this space, followed by Alberta, and BC is now starting to look into it more as well. In Ontario, DERs could satisfy a material portion of electricity needs. Estimates that account for real-world conditions indicate that DERs could meet between 1 and 4 gigawatts of peak summer demand by 2032. That's 5 to 14% potentially. And it's the equivalent of 40 to 60% of Ontario's incremental summer capacity needs over the next decade. So it's a big chunk. In BC, center column here on the slide, by 2040, DERs could reduce peak demand by 700 megawatts or 4%. It could even be up to 10% with strong policy support. This is what we found in our study, and I'll talk a little bit more about that study in a second. And in California, where also DER potential has been studied, they found the potential by 2035 exceeds 7 gigawatts or 15% of peak demand. And by then, California could actually avoid over $750 million every year in traditional grid investment. So now I'll offer some more details on the BC study we're conducting with Danske. Our objective here was to assess the achievable potential for DERs to contribute to emerging grid needs under different scenarios. You're seeing here the list of DER measures and the type of customers we've scoped in. We're actually also very fortunate to have BC Hydro supply us, or Danske rather, real-world data that feeds into the study, which is great. And we've also incorporated assumptions from BC Hydro's latest integrated resource plan that just came out last month. We've modeled 3 scenarios. They differ basically in the level of electrification and policy. In the reference scenario, we're asking, what will the potential for DERs be under business as usual policies and market conditions? In the accelerated scenario, we want to know how much more could these resources contribute in a high electrification future under current policies. And the last one, DER-centric or policy support scenario, considers how much DERs could address increased load growth under a future with strong policy support. And these are our preliminary results. They show that BC could reduce its peak demand by around 1.7 gigawatts or 10% using DERs. And that compares to, on the bottom right, I've included the reference scenario, compares to around 700 megawatts or 4% in the reference scenario, which is less than half of what the DER-centric future could look like. And I included the load curves for the other 2 scenarios here on the right just to show how load in the DER-centric scenario flattens. So we're seeing pronounced shedding and shifting of load, of peak load in the centric scenario. But what are the conditions to achieve this kind of potential? Basically, it's significant electrification of transport and buildings, and strong policy support to help get these DERs enrolled. And really, reaching this potential requires a fundamental shift in conceptualizing DERs as a mere supplemental resource to a central load growth solution. The next steps in this work are that we finalize this study with Danske and we will publish it in Q1. We're also working, and this is where my presentation is a little bit about the distribution level, we're also working on a separate study of DERs. in Ontario, and that one is at the distribution level. So I think probably many of you are aware of the IESO previous study that looked at the bulk system level and the DR potential there. But for this new Ontario study that we're doing with Brattle, we are looking at the distribution level, and we have secured an LDC partner in Essex Power. Results for that one are due in Q1, and we will publish that work next year as well. So to wrap up, I want to leave you with 4 key takeaways. Number 1, modeling does suggest DRs could help satisfy a material share of electricity needs cost effectively. Modeling, but understanding the potential of DRs, as I mentioned, is actually really early days in Canada. It's very much in its infancy. And reaching the potential requires a fundamental shift, really conceptualizing DERs from a supplemental resource to a central load growth solution. And modeling can help us quantify the benefits for utilities, operators, and ratepayers alike, and also help determine policy design. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Stefan. We'll save all the questions till after, and Edouard's going to give me a device that has Slido at that point. All right, next we have Luis, who is a PhD student at SFU, and he is also looking at DERs, the potential of demand response in solar, and he is looking at the local wires up to the provincial level. Stefan, I would say you're also looking at the distribution level, because all of these fine things are connected to the distribution level, so it all touches us. What gives Luis hope is the hard work of young people and acts of kindness, however small. Luis, come on up.
Okay, let me just figure out the slides. Ticker here, right?
The big green button.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question. When we sort of electrify everything in our economy, what is going to break down first? Generation, transmission, distribution, or everything at the same time? So the bad news is I don't have an answer today, but the good news is that I want to walk you through some slides to kind of brainstorm this together and how we can connect all the different models that we've been discussing yesterday and today. So this is a summary of my talk. We have a big country, Canada. We have great models, like we saw yesterday, different approaches to model the economy and the generation, the transmission. But we kind of need to zoom in into what's going on in our neighborhoods. And also what residential and commercial buildings can connect to their households, their loads. So these are the DERs. So I'm going to talk about the role of distributed solar, battery, electric vehicle management, and heat pumps, and what comes along heat pumps, and why these are important assets for the grid. So the World Energy Outlook, published in October, talks about how the peak demand in advanced economies is going to increase significantly. So that's the figure on the left. And you can see the electrification is going to increase for advanced economies for 400 to 600 gigawatts, mainly because of heating. Then there's like an offset effect because of efficiency, and you can question whether that's going to happen because of Jevons paradox. When we are more efficient, we consume more. But the peaks are coming, and we need to handle them with this massive electrification. So, of course, the obvious outcome of that is that the grids are going to need to be more flexible. So the World Energy Outlook talks about this. And what can we do? So as Stefan was saying, we can work with peak shaving. We can change our heating and cooling systems. We can think of, for example, heat pumps with fuel backup. So when it's too cold and the heat pumps cannot deliver efficiently, you can have a system that doesn't generate as much of an issue with the peaks. Then we can have distributed batteries, so energy storage. Then you can have rooftop solar, and you can do EV scheduling. And all these things are going to help alleviate this increase in demand. So the World Energy Outlook, just to wrap up in terms of background, does tell us that the demand response of batteries are going to be an important part of this balancing supply and demand worldwide. So the premise of this talk is connecting, how can we connect the macro planning that we saw yesterday to the micro reality of distribution systems, what tools are available, and how we can sort of start putting some numbers to this, especially in the space of open data, if we don't have access to utility data, for instance, and then how we can bridge this. And one way to bridge these two levels of planning is to the understanding how demand is going to be reshaped. Also, at the macro level, we can think of other implications like land use and emission impacts. So one of the big questions that we had discussed yesterday was all the opposition that communities can have to big projects like new transmission lines and large wind projects. So there's a big benefit in understanding really how much the DERs can give us in terms of avoiding these utility scale projects. So now let's look at the method. So how can we estimate this? What tools do we have? What open data do we have? So if we want to model the micro component, and if we have distribution system models, we can stress our loads. That's going to give us some idea to what's going to happen to the grid, what's going to happen to the transformers, what's going to happen to the voltage levels. So that is like step one, stress the feeder, add EVs and heat pumps. Then you can apply the non-wires alternatives to see how the PV is going to offset some of those additional loads, and also the batteries to manage the shifting of the load. And then you can, as a result of the load modeling, you can estimate how much you need to build and upgrade the grid. And then you can bring all those results back to the macro planning. So this is kind of an idea of how this can be done, and I'm going to show you like some rough numbers of what it looks like. So in terms of data, the US has this open data set that is very useful. It's called the SmartDS. It has open DSS models for feeders in North American cities, spanning from San Francisco to Austin and also Greensboro in North Carolina. And then they also have this EULP data set that is a very rich data set in terms of end-use load. So they have different profiles for heating, heating with electric backup, heating with heat pumps with fuel backup, and so on. So if we combine these data sets, we can sort of start playing with some numbers and models. And that's kind of what I did. I took the freedom to sort of find proximity, geographical proximity of some provinces to US states. So for instance, Montana is to Alberta, Washington is to BC, Michigan is to Ontario, Vermont is to Quebec, just to have a rough initial estimate. Of course, a lot of calibration would be needed to refine these results. Once we do that, we stress the feeders. We add a lot of EVs and heat pumps. Then we add the batteries and the storage. So you have these different scenarios that you can build in OpenDSS. And then the challenge also is how you can bring these micro results to a macro level. So, for example, with the SmartDS data sets, I'm working with 250,000 customers, but of course there are so many more at the provincial level. So how can we scale this utility level, sort of distribution level results to the macro level is one of the challenges if you don't have the whole grid, distribution grid to work with. And then for the results we're going to see, I produced this generation simulator that is based on the Coders dataset. This is just a placeholder to later use proper capacity expansion model, one of the ones that we've been looking at for the past few days. So that gives us the connection from the micro to the macro. And then, of course, using all the great data from Coders is very important. Then in terms of land use intensity, just to mention that once we know how many gigawatts of utility-scale solar and onshore wind we're sort of deferring or avoiding, we can estimate how much land we're also avoiding. So that's a big component of the potential impacts that often are probably ignored. But of course, there are costs associated with these distribution level solutions. So how can the insights look like? So these are like preliminary results. So do take them with a lot of grains of salt. So what we're looking at here is a graph that has 58 feeders. On the orange panel, you are seeing the profiles for summer and winter. You can see that the winter peaks are very high because we're modeling heat pumps with electric backup. So that's very inefficient because if it gets too cold, it's just a big resistance, adding a lot of load. But then if you add fuel backup for the heat pumps, and then you add the management of the EVs, and you add the batteries, then you can reduce that peak. And then what's interesting is that these profiles are for a specific neighborhood that is represented by these 58 feeders. And then, of course, ideally, if we wanted to improve sort of the utility of this approach, you would need data from these provinces. So this is kind of like a dramatic exercise because the difference between the peaks is pretty high. You can see like 70% difference between one scenario and the other scenario, where we do manage this great electrification. But that's because I'm just doing like a very sort of synthetic exercise where there's like 99% EV penetration and a lot of heat pumps and a lot of storage and PV. So it's just to illustrate what we can do, because we don't know exactly how much we're going to have of each resource. So we need a tool that is going to help us generate multiple scenarios. And then if we bring those numbers and we try to scale that to these 4 provinces, maybe we can get this, call it like savings in capacity, about 20 gigawatts in 2050. If you have solar and wind, that is going to help avoid some land use for power production. And then for gas, whatever is deferred, emissions are going to be reduced. And of course, these results need to be calibrated to the proper models that you've been presenting this past couple of days. So the numbers here are not, please don't pay attention to the actual numbers of gigawatts. So takeaways. The distribution system modeling can tell us a lot about the limitations. So the model is going to tell us when we start to see voltage problems, when we start to see overloading of the different assets like transformers at the substation level, but also at the low voltage level. Then we can also look at the potential in terms of land use and emissions, and also avoided capacity. And then ultimately, there are going to be trade-offs. If you have a proper calibrated model with all of the unit cost accounted for, you could estimate for the heavy NWA scenario, how much is that going to cost, including the grid reinforcements, versus just building a lot more capacity, so a lot more wires and a lot more utility scale. And that's going to give us a basis to discuss the different trade-offs and, of course, the nuances of what can happen province to province. And then for my future work, this is part of my PhD thesis, I need to do a lot of calibration. I'm working with US data sets, so if anybody is keen to share Canadian data sets to better calibrate these models, I'm happy to discuss. And also testing different capacity expansion models. And then more assets, so what happens if we add, for example, preheating and precooling. There's a lot of discussion about heating, storage, and the capacity of buildings to manage that. And then also stressing more the different scenarios, because we need to plan for reliability. And that leads me to this graph. So a lot's been discussed about the uncertainty. So there's a branch of decision-making science called the decision methods under deep uncertainty that's basically trying to frame a number of uncertainties and applying some machine learning methods to find robust solutions. Because sometimes in the community, we are very sort of inclined to look for the optimal solution, the least cost solution, and that's what the regulators call for, because we don't want the rates to increase that much. But then sometimes we don't know what's going to happen and still need to make large investments. So the DMDU methods are a potential tool that can be used to minimize regret. So what can we build today, and we can plan to build, that regardless of what's going to happen with uncertainty, we're going to regret it the least. So that's a concept that I'm also including in my thesis, and I'm also happy to discuss if people are interested. And it's kind of similar to yesterday's talk about ensemble, so that's very, very interesting. So yeah, that's it. So thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thanks, Luis. I would just note that it's not just sometimes we don't know what's going to happen, it's all the time we don't know. But sometimes models are useful. Next, we have Charles, who is a software engineer at Dunsky, who's going to talk about using AMI data to improve load forecasting. And where Charles gets hope is from seeing the increase in community-led DER projects across municipalities and Indigenous communities, which are not only cutting emissions, but are also helping people take charge of their energy futures and benefit. So over to Charles.
Thank you, Julia. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here this morning. So I'll be discussing, I think it's a great segue of what we just saw. It'll be a little bit more on a bottom-up approach, but I'll be discussing how we can leverage AMI data for enhancing load forecasting, and this is based on a project we did with a utility in Canada this year for a pilot project. Before going into that, I just want to present a little bit more Dunsky Energy and Climate, the company I work for. It's a clean energy transition consultancy company. As you've heard, we do potential studies, but we also live at the intersection of program management, analytics, and planning. And so, we've been in the business for 20 years. We've done work across Canada and North America. And as a software engineer, well, I'm here to help on the modeling side of things and the data-driven approaches that we try to incorporate. So diving back into the subject, we've been talking a lot about the increase in DERs at the distribution level and trying to quantify the flexibility that's associated to those DERs. As we know, that flexibility will increase most likely over time, so it's important to try to have a reliable estimate of that flexibility so that we can manage either like avoiding or delaying costs at the distribution level, or also just making sure that we have room to continue electrifying our world. So, but the question is, how do we actually, or what are the methods that we can use leveraging AMI data to quantify that flexibility? So from that framing question, and if we add like more requirements to that, like can we quantify that at a specific location, for example, like at a specific feeder for a specific hour and with a reliability level? The way we approach this question is by having kind of like a pipeline in 3 steps. And the first one is to have visibility on the DRs that customers actually have and also know how they're using them in real time. The second aspect would be to understand the load profiles related to those DERs, whether it's a single one or a mix, and then translating that into planning metrics that can be used by planners. So as you know, like on the right side here, we have a short example of what AMI data can look like, 15-minute interval of a random urban household energy consumption. And just by looking at that, it doesn't give us specific information on if there is a DR at the household or not. So it's kind of considered invisible. We need to make our models intelligent enough to try to predict if there is a DR at that location or not. And what we can do is, yes, we can start aggregating that data and study the traffic patterns. We can look at specific patterns that can be related to an EV, for example, or a solar panel. And we can also add to that contextual data. For EVs, it could be EV registration data, it could be PV interconnections, it can be telematics, cell phone usage. Depending on the context, you add what you need to try to infer and come with a prediction. And by adding up those predictions at every customer smart meter, we end up having what we call a feeder level map of DRs with confidence levels. Obviously, at the start, when we're starting to build this, you won't necessarily have a perfect score, and there's going to be uncertainty in what you're trying to model. But the important aspect of this is to get going and build some confidence level, and then when you're acquiring more data and moving and refining your models, then you can push that confidence level up, and it gives you more reliability into the flexibility that you're trying to model. Now, the example I was showing before of the AMI data was quite clean in the sense that, we could see specific events for a sustained period. It gives us interesting information. It's not always like that. Most likely the AMI data is just very messy and there's not a lot of information that you can gather from it. Sometimes you'll have possible events. It's really important to try to, at this level, to have just good data principles in general. Speaking from the utility perspective of, it's important to have complete data, filter out anything that's missing or bad data quality, trying to also have it segregated by important segmentations like urban, rural, commercial, industrial. That type of information helps make predictions that are based on more intelligent or useful information. An example, to be a little bit more concrete, an example that we did for the utility, they were essentially interested in trying to detect their solar customers, so the people that would have a PV installation. But their AMI data was net and censored in the sense that they only saw the energy that was going through the meter. They had no information on the generated energy from the PV installation. So the technique that we came with was to try to recreate the true consumption that the consumer could actually have. So here it would be the yellow curve that you see that's dotted. So trying to recreate that yellow curve that brings back to the actually observed red curve. And by doing that, that there's a probability attached to that true consumption. So we're trying to figure out how likely it is that the customer actually has a PV installation. And by attaching that probability, then we're able to determine if it's likely or not, and if we will assign or say that the customer with this smart meter has a PV installation or not. And matching that to their program data led to pretty much on par results, which was quite good for that use case. But this is a more standard approach. There are more complicated examples or more challenging approaches when using AMI data. Electrical vehicles is a good one in the sense that depending on where you are in Canada, it can be more difficult to capture. The use case where we were, the penetration of EVs was maybe around 1%, 2% of the total population. So we're looking at very imbalanced data sets, trying to find, the EVs within that AMI data and trying to learn from the possible events is more complicated. So we need to kind of filter a lot of stuff out and determine very specific features that can help us detect these. Here are a couple ones that we looked at, but we also had much more than this. But just looking at the peaks of level 2 charging sizes, we know there are different types of charging sizes. Looking at peaks at regular times of day, so what types of schedules could someone be charging their EV? Looking at load factor, all of that helps us. But also at this point, you can add, again, contextual data. So EV registration, if you're looking at light duty vehicles, but if you're looking at medium or large vehicles, then you can add more data like telematics or data that can come from your fleet, from the fleet directly. So yeah, and then once we build this feeder level map of DERs, those were 2 examples, but you can have much more than that. We're moving from an average customer to more specific representative profiles of our customers. And at this level, what we can do, obviously you have a load profile, but you can cluster that load profile depending on the behavior, the DER mix that could be behind the household. And that creates more granular or more what I call just a library of data-driven profiles. So you have a mix. In this case, we ended up with 23 load profiles, I believe. This example is for the mix of a customer that would not have an EV, had non-electrical heating and solar installation. We ended up having 2 clusters and 2 seasons, obviously. And so this gives more information to the planner when they're trying to see where to upgrade their infrastructure or just information on how their customers are using or generating energy. Then this brings us back to the initial question of flexibility. Now that we have load profiles, we're able to estimate how often these DERs are actually available, and you can roll that up to a certain hour, a year at the feeder level. So you're getting a much more like stochastic, interesting model to quantify that flexibility. And that's one example of a thing you can do with this type of data or analytics. But you can also start looking at more fine-tuned scenarios, like if we're looking at a specific feeder, like how would the increase in EVs impact that feeder, or like where in my whole feeder network would EVs hit the hardest. That type of stuff becomes more quantifiable, and you can attach confidence levels to those estimates that you're calculating. The segue now from the flexibility is that now that we've quantified that aspect, we're able to also look into how we can optimize that flexibility, because if we're just looking at optimizing for costs, obviously the DERs will all start charging, or most likely at a specific period after the peak price period. This can lead to stress on the feeders, something that we're not necessarily looking for. So that at this level you can add different types of constraints that are very specific to your grid, localized as well. So in this example could just be a very specific load limit, but you can imagine adding more precise stuff depending on your context, which will have an impact on the flexibility that you're trying to manage. And so the idea behind all of this is that by adding these small steps, you're building a DR management flow, right? And so you're developing forecasts, you're optimizing the schedules of these DERs, and at some point you're also looking to manage the dispatch of those DERs, and you're able to get analytics or reporting on that. So it's an ongoing process that feeds itself, and which can be very beneficial at the distribution level, in our opinion. What this changes specifically for distribution planners, well, on the right here you have a feeder level map that we did for a customer in the West about essentially the load growth of specific DRs that would be on their network. So it's a heat map that shows essentially where the emerging constraints could be. So it makes it very visible and easy for planners to spot this and to be confident of where they need to invest their money to upgrade their infrastructure. So it helps delay or avoid costs, but it also helps applying like a measured risk at what you're actually spending. And then on a provincial or national level, it helps have more, like I said before, like scenarios of, what if EV adoption is front-loaded at a specific location. Those types of questions become more easy to integrate in the planning process, which can be of help when looking at a higher level at these things. And so my key takeaway is obviously that we need to work on visibility. A lot of this stuff isn't visible for the utilities, or they're not collecting enough data to make it visible. And once we work on those models that make this visible, it'll enable a lot of control and coordination on those DERs. And so the thing that I want to kind of like leave on today is that by building this toolkit, you're not just working for like a peak day management tool, right? It's something that you can integrate in your day-to-day workflow to manage and monitor that load growth. So it becomes something that's quite powerful when you're just looking at your day-to-day analytics, and can be very helpful on that side. So that'll be my key takeaway for today. Thank you very much, and looking forward for the discussion.
All right, last but not least, we have Koen, who is a supervisor of transmission planning at the IESO. And she's going to talk today about some local achievable potential work the IESO has done. And what gives Koen hope is seeing diverse teams come together like this room, to tackle complex challenges. It reminds Koen of what's possible when we collaborate and combine our strengths. Koen, over to you.
Thank you, Julia, and good morning, everyone. And My name is Kun Xiong. I'm the supervisor of transmission planning in the IESO. So today is really my pleasure to present this. Is actually a result of a joint work within the IESO. I do want to acknowledge my colleagues in our demand side management teams who contribute a lot to this material and slide deck. So today I'm going to walk you through like 4 key components, key areas. First, I'm going to have a high-level introduction about Ontario's electricity sector and our regional electricity planning. And then I'll provide you an overview about local achievable potential study, and then how they integrate into the regional planning work. And then the last, I will share with you some of the future opportunities. So today, I just want to say, you may just see those presentation is from a higher level perspective. You may not see a lot of curves and data, but I just want to, really highlight how to turn those complex analysis and studies into our practical programs. So I guess I don't need to introduce more about the IESO. We're the electricity system operator and planner for Ontario. So we work with the generator, the transmitters, and the local distribution company and energy consumers for sure. So we work together to make sure our electricity system can supply our future growth and reliably and efficiently. So in terms of the planning, we do different level of planning. We do the box system planning, which is focused on the backbone of the transmission system in Ontario. We also looking after the regional electricity planning. So in Ontario, we have the whole province divided into 21 electricity planning regions. So we look at each of the region about identify their unique needs, and then we consider a range of options and how to address those needs. So inside those options, the demand side management, that does a big important component of those solutions. And as the IESO, we also enable conservation energy efficiency. So that helps us to enable a comprehensive solution package to address those needs. If you are looking into specific regions, so do go to our websites to find more detail for all those regional planning initiatives. So we are, the IESO has a long history about provincial level achievable potential study. We have done that for many years, which form the foundation of the demand side management, budgets, and targets. So building on that, we are advancing those potential study, we call that LABs, local potential study, with a more further analysis and tailor that into a more localized solution for the local, to meet the local electricity needs. So our consultants, the ICF, they conduct the study, and then they develop a digital twin modeling framework and leverage a very key components data and collect those and turn that into the potential. So like I mentioned, I may not be the best person to have the detail, like technical detail for you, but I do have a link here. If you are interested to know more about those in-depth analysis and modeling, please feel free to review this report on our website. So in a high level, how we identify those potential. So we start with the technical potential, which is the estimate electricity savings for implementing all technically feasible measures. When we talk about measures here, the scope includes the energy efficiency, the demand forecast, the demand response, and the behind-the-meter solar and battery storage. So this is more like engineering, like perfect words, all the technical feasible possible potential are considered in this. And then we move to the economic potential. So which is the savings narrowed down from the technical level, the potential level, and narrow that into by considering some of the cost effectiveness. So which is have those potential narrows to those make economic sense. And then finally, we reach the achievable potential. So building on the economic potential, the achievable potential is the final savings estimate that's remaining after adoption rates are applied. And also, it's represents more realistic estimates that could be considered by our planning into our recommendations in the regional plan, and also can be acquired and procured through our programs. So as you can see, this is really moved from the technically possible to economically viable and eventually make that realistically achievable. So how we integrate those study like labs results into our regional planning. So all the years when we carry out any regional plans, we are integrating the lab's findings into our, when we develop those options. And so one of the, those really, we want to also do this more is to ensure we consider those feasible and cost-effective non-wire alternatives into our solution package. I think traditionally we always talk about wires, which is focused on transmission. We need to build a lot of transmission lines to meet our needs. Now we are more involved into a solution package, which have the wires and non-wires, and the demand sides, and the potential solution. That's a very important component. So the study is focused on two regions. It's Toronto and Ottawa. We do have a very comprehensive report about, for example, the Toronto Integrated Regional Resource Plan. So please go there to review the reports if you're interested to know a little bit more details. And just give you an example how those potential study come up. They identify, so the study identified the incremental opportunities of the megawatts, the capacity megawatts that we can rely on, and we can consider it in our recommendation to meet those needs. And then we combine those into our solution package. The similar work is ongoing for Ottawa, and also it will be have that solution in our Ottawa IRP recommendations. I want to highlight it when we say incremental is because we have already considered our planned demand-side management program into our demand forecast. And then now we're talking about how much further we can do. That's the potential we're talking today. So some of the exciting future opportunities. In January this year, the Ontario government announced a new 2025 to 2036 EDSM framework with the enhanced budget and the scope derived from our past achievable potential study. And also the Ontario Energy Boards, or the OEB, is also advancing initiatives to enable the ISO and the local utilities to co-fund those EDSM programs that benefit both the local networks and the regional and provincial electricity system. So at the same time, us as an ISO, we are expanding the targets for our safe and energy programs, which enhance existing offerings and introduce new programs and provide funds to local utilities across the province to support the customer engagement. And also, of course, we'll continue to explore more labs opportunities and through the targeted incentives and other approaches, and collaborate with all the partners to unlock the local potential and deliver the simplified one-window experience for customers. And then the takeaway, I only have one, just want to highlight here. This isn't just one study on paper. It's actually turning the lab study into the regional planning. That means we turn those complex analysis into action, into real programs, which create a roadmap for cost-effective solutions that enhance the whole system resilience and flexibility. I think that's all my presentation. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you, panel number 6. We have questions rolling in, and if there are no physical questions, I will start with the virtual ones. I will note that almost everybody is anonymous. So even though people have upvoted, I think I'm going to encourage lack of anonymity, and I'm going to go to the people who put their names beside their questions. So Mohammed from Deloitte, brave person. And then it'll be Pierre-Olivier Pinault, another brave person. Okay, Mohammed asks Stéphane, have you studied whether the benefits of DERs decrease when they are not aggregated through VPPs? I'm just going to adjust the question. Stéphane made a comment in his speech about the need to not talk about DERs because they're all so different. So let's break that question down. And conveniently, there's really only 3 DERs. We're talking solar, we're talking batteries, and talking demand response. So Stéphane, solar, batteries, demand response. Is the value less if they're not aggregated?
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think, the value to the utility, I think, is vastly less, but we didn't study this because the whole premise of the study was to figure out, okay, what is the value to the utility by aggregating them and leveraging them. And a lot of them are obviously commercial and industrial and also residential, but if you have a really big industrial consumer that you can enroll in a demand response program that can do a lot, but you also can do a lot with hundreds of thousands of residential customers. Maybe one thing that I found really interesting to highlight in our study is that, so we looked at the latest integrated resource plan from BC Hydro, and they actually increased their avoided cost estimate, almost doubled it compared to their previous IRP, and that actually led to basically all the DERs that we analyzed in our study were cost effective. So in our case, the technical and economic potential were the same. It's a bit on the high estimate compared to other utilities, what BC Hydro thinks is their avoided cost. But I think that also speaks to the potential.
Okay, next, Pierre-Olivier asks, DERs have great potential. However, current tariffs across Canada provide very little incentive for consumers to become prosumers. To the whole panel, do you think changing the tariff structure will be required to increase DER penetration? How likely is that? But first to Pierre-Olivier, is there a particular DER you want to focus on? Solar, battery, demand response, or all of the above? EVs too. Luis, do you have choose your favorite DER?
Can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah.
I think it is a great question to ask, and there's no one tool to answer that. I think we need to make use of all the tools that we have. So yesterday we saw the different models about they're looking into supply chain modeling, and using those models can be very useful if we couple that with EV. So for instance, what do you need to deploy at a large scale the demand response with electric vehicles? What kind of digital technologies do you need? Who are your suppliers? Do you have vendors that are not American? All these questions are important. And so, yeah, it's a case by case, sort of solution by solution, and also vendor by vendor that you can look at. But I don't have an answer. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
Yeah, you can also.
I mean, one of the policy levers that we used for the most ambitious scenario that gave us the biggest potential. One of the main levers is really to increase the compensation for customers, and that's like a major way to get more enrollment. So I think if that's the goal, then that's probably necessary, but actually it is cost effective in our study to do so.
All right, question over here.
Thank you very much. Alexandra Mallet, Associate Professor, School of Public Policy here at Carleton. Interesting presentations. My question in particular is for Koen. I guess I wanted to know a little bit more about the achievable potential. So for instance, can you walk us through a little bit about the assumptions? Is it based on historical rates of adoptions, or do you look at municipal level policies that might support the integration of DERs or like save on energy? Thanks.
Hello. Oh, okay. Thank you for your questions. Like I mentioned, probably my primary focus is on planning. I may not be the best person to answer this question, but I'm more than happy to connect you with our subject matters within ISO. But I think in high level, the adoption rates does consider many factors, including like the customer awareness and also the customer acceptance, and about some historical acceptance of also those achievable potential. So many factors has been considered, but absolutely, I'm happy to connect you with our colleagues to answer your question. Thank you.
Great. Over this side.
Right. Hani Farag, I'm professor from York University. I was standing on this side in the last session, but I wasn't able to ask my question because Edward said no more questions. So I thought to move to the other side to ask the question in this session. All right. Two questions I have. The first one is related to the distribution modeling tools. So most of the LDCs, they have already their own distribution planning team who are using some sort of software, commercial software, like Simidest, like Dixieland, or they use open source like OpenDSS. And obviously it seems that most of us are using also our in-house modeling tools. The question is, what is the expectation for LDCs? Is it to continue to rely on some commercial software tools that they already use for their planning? Or is there a limitation for those tools? And is there really a need for in-house kind of modeling? The second question is related to the transformation for LDCs. We have seen in other jurisdictions like California, Australia, Europe, that because of the increase in the DR adoption, started to see also some regulatory changes about just not being the LDC, but also being DNO, like distribution network operators, or DSO, like DSOs, distribution system operators. So how do we see the transformation for LDCs right now in Canada? Are we really gonna evolve over time for the LDCs, or gonna be just stand still, like just service providers? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Since the implications of electrification are multi-stakeholder, I think it's important to have tools where multiple stakeholders can actually sort of interrogate. So it is the responsibility of the utility to plan their grid with a proper commercial tool. Then what happens if there are other stakeholders that want to interrogate that model with other questions? And what happens if you want to connect that model with other models that we saw yesterday's? So I think there's value in developing these new tools that are open sourced, just to ask questions, what kind of questions we can ask, not to substitute the current ecosystem used for planning. That is a very important thing. Can you repeat your second question, though?
It's about the transformation for LDC to DNO, like distribution network operators, or DSO, like distribution system operators.
Oh.
There's lots of kind of, even the ISO, I guess, you really want to see, the transition of LDCs, how it's going to evolve over time, and whether Canada gonna basically allow this kind of evolving paradigm for distribution network again. Just providing surface as LDC or get really engaged in the DR integration, have some sort of distribution market, electricity market on the level of distribution, or do nothing.
That might be my question to answer. So there is an active conversation in Ontario about developing a roadmap to become DSOs. So I would also, though, say that Toronto Hydro is already actively managing its system. We have a demand response program. We've had it for a number of years, and we're growing it from 6 megawatts to 30 megawatts over the next 5 years. So kind of already happening, but yes, very active conversation in Ontario.
Great, thank you.
Vincent.
Hi, I'm Vincent Dufresne. I'm here representing la ville de Lac-Mégantic in Quebec. We have the chance of having a renewable energy microgrid in Lac-Mégantic. So questions for and first of all, I'm much like the panels. Thank you so much. It's like Christmas morning for me. So my question is, has any one of you studied the role of microgrids in maximizing the value of DER, and whether grid edge, intelligence grid edge, detailed micromanagement of the DERs would increase the benefits to utilities, society, and so
on? In my case, I have not, but what I can say is that these tools, open tools, we can sort of isolate some feeders that can have heavy control, like a microgrid connected to the rest of the grid, but isolated with more control. So we can think of these kinds of scenarios. And there's a flexibility to, as I said previously, interrogate the models with this kind of questions that are of a lot of interest, but I personally have not yet gotten there.
Right. Cutting edge question.
Charles, any position on that?
Well, to my knowledge, we haven't neither done any work on microgrids specifically. But kind of like what Louis was saying, I think there's a lot of, and to echo the question before that, there is a lot of tools out there that we can use to kind of like simulate those cases. So I think it's doable, but there might not be like a standard way of looking at that type of example right now. But it's a really interesting challenge.
Many thanks for your response.
Normand.
Thank you. Very interesting panel. There's a huge difference between the summer peak and winter peak in terms of length instead of amplitude. But you did not really describe it. For me, for example, thinking that one would branch a ZV at minus 25 and empty its battery to make sure to balance the grid is very unlikely, because you want to be able to have access to your car if you need to move in an emergency. So how did you include these very different aspects in your modeling?
So as I said in the presentation, I have a framework to sort of set it up and parameterize all of it. And I could certainly refine these assumptions. For these particular runs, you see the winter peak was pretty high because for the unmanaged case, because there was a heat pump with electric backup. And then for the scheduling of the EVs, I think you're right, there can be like, sort of not apply scheduling during these cold days. But that's, I guess, part of that calibration in the next steps, more than what I presented today.
Yeah, I think it's really important to distinguish between the contribution DERs could make for a winter peak and a summer peak. So definitely so first of all, for each of the, and that goes also to the question someone else over here asked earlier, which was in our study, well, basically the participation rates are informed by real world data. I can connect you to Dansky to tell you which exactly they drew on, but it differs by DER, and it ranges from like 2 to 35% of participation, for example. And yeah, when we look at the summer, for example, in the summer, vehicle to grid potential contribution to the potential is way up compared to the winter. Conversely, water heating, for example, because the ambient temperature in the summer is already higher, so you don't need to heat water as much with electricity. So the potential that you could use that for DERs is reduced. So yeah, there are changes from summer to winter, and it's really important to consider that.
Charles, did you?
Can you just maybe repeat
I mean, there's a huge difference between summer and winter peak.
Yeah.
And I think we tend to look at solutions in California and Australia, and I don't think they'll work in Canada.
Yeah. One thing that was
Reframe
actually,
it.
sorry. One thing that was actually interesting also in the way we were modeling or trying to model the EVs with the AMI data is that the utility didn't have any information either on like it was difficult for them to label specific like clients that could have an EV, and so it was really difficult to make like an informed decision on what these loads look like, because there's no or it's difficult to have public data about this, and so you really need to work on like other features that you can leverage to kind of like make a more informed decision. Then again, the use case where we were at, it was a mid western province in Canada, and like I said, the range of EVs was like 1 or 2%, so like the total impact on the combined peak wasn't very significant for them, but it's something that we could probably model better in provinces where there's a higher penetration of EVs.
Thanks.
I'm just going to go to another brave soul who put their name. I think this is more of a rhetorical question than a real question, so I'll just read it out. This is from Luis. This is his Christmas letter, and one of his big wishes is for data, and he's wondering, hoping, dreaming that the IESO will make its grid data open and publicly available for researchers. So I'm not going to put Kuhn or Dave Richardson on the spot, but just take back to the office that people are hoping for more data access. Question over here.
Yes, thank you so much for the very interesting presentations. I have a question for Kuhn, actually. Does IESO conduct these grid hosting capacity studies? If so, is this, do you make this publicly available so that this gives maybe a potential developer an indication to which are the ideal points in the grid where you can inject or eject energy from? So.
Sorry, may I ask you to repeat the question?
Does IESO conducts any grid hosting capacity studies to identify which could be the ideal points in your grid where you can put in energy or get out energy from, or do you do this periodically, if so?
Okay. Yeah, so if you ask about those capacity available on those grids to share,
more.
Is that the right
or
question?
More which points in the grid you could inject energy or eject energy?
Yeah, so we, as the ISO, we do share those information through, from the generator side, it's more on deliverability study. So we share those results to have different zones. For example, if you have capacity, you can connect your generator and we can deliver that to where it's needed. And we're also working on some of the demand, like the load capacity, which means there will be some available capacity, like you can connect your load. So those something we are working on to to help sharing those transparent data.
Yeah, and all utilities, local utilities in Ontario are now required to have hosting or load capacity maps online. So Toronto Hydro's had one up for about a year. We also have a hosting capacity feeder lookup tool. So you can type in your postal code and find out whether there's room for solar.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia.
Question over here.
Thank you so much for all the presentations. I'm Carl from ECCC. My question is specifically for Louise, and I'm particularly interested in if you could just describe a little bit more in detail how you modeled your land intensity of solar particularly.
So that's really not the actual focus of my work today, but it's something I should look into. And when I looked at the literature, there's there's some numbers you can look at. There's some tables that discuss whether you should take into account the for wind, for example, the land intensity is higher because you need to have more land than what the actual sort of infrastructure is required. And in the case of solar, that gap between the project's land and the actual infrastructure is much smaller, so you can make a lot more use of, at the utility scale level, of your land infrastructure ratio. And certainly the potential for rooftop is that you already built a lot, and you can use like your urban footprint to kind of estimate how many panels you can install like per hectare. And there are some numbers out there, and I'm happy to share them with you. But to me, it's more like how you can use these inputs to estimate interesting metrics as a result of a macro model, meaning a capacity expansion model that gives you capacity numbers of installed capacity.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
And in your research, did you notice anything about different constraints on different types of land being converted?
Not in my personal research, but in my lab, there's some colleagues working on that, because if you dig into that, if you need to install a lot of solar, a lot of wind, the adequacy of the sites starts to sort of lose quality. You use the best sites early on. And so if you require a lot of capacity down the road, maybe you run out of the best sites. And so looking at ways to sort of avoid using lower performing assets down the road is important. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing nobody standing and nobody brave enough to put their name, I am now digging into the anonymous questions. But this means I get to be more liberal with how I interpret them. So we have a question about who should drive DER adoption. And because I've got the mic, I'm going to break this question up. I'm going to ask Stefan to answer who should drive solar, Louise to answer who should drive batteries, Charles to deal with demand response, and I think Koen has actually already touched on energy efficiency, because that's the IESO, at least in Ontario, who runs the energy efficiency program. So Koen gets a bye because she addressed this question in her presentation. But Stefan, solar, Louis, battery, and Charles, demand response. Who should drive it?
I'm not sure if, but I think our kind of review of the landscape in Canada has, and the framework of analysis that we put together is really that I think policymakers need to, so I'm speaking not specifically to solar, I'm sorry, but I think the general direction needs to be given by policymakers through like roadmap strategies, so that then planners, utility planners, that they can plan for the future that is going to be good for Canadians. And it trickles down, then the planning and then policy needs to ensure that DERs are actually available. So, electrifying homes and transportation. So I think it's like a multi-level effort.
Yeah, so for storage, I think it's like an ecosystem, because you have the manufacturers and the supply side that want to, get into market, something that people want to buy. because it's good for them. Of course, there are different levels or layers of customers. You can have like households that are large that are interested in sustainability and may buy a battery, or you can have commercial buildings that may be interested in sort of participating in a program that's already in place. So I think there's like a shared responsibility of vendors of the batteries and also utilities, because ultimately they're the ones who should have an understanding of how the different services that the batteries can provide are going to benefit them. And then the customers have a take there because they probably need to invest, so they need an incentive for that investment. So it's like a multi-stakeholder problem.
Great. And Charles?
Yeah, on my side for demand response, I see, it in two ways. Like the utilities obviously need to make programs that are appealing for customers and also make it as accessible as possible in all forms and kinds, because I think even still today we're still lagging in how people are adopting these techniques. Like just I'd be surprised to know how it went, because like last year or this year, I don't remember exactly when, but at some point Hydro-Quebec went full on subsidizing the thermostats that you can use for their program with high-low. And I'd be curious to see how that impact the market, or how customers reacted to that approach, because still today in my general just very anecdotal experience, not many people have seemed to have fallen into that program and actually adopted it. And then I think also just from my software experience, I think there's a lot of applications that help make the demand response programs more accessible. They're not it's not something that's very widespread, or there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make it easy to use, focus on the user experience, and make it also in an integrated way so that it's simple for people to to join those types of programs and start doing demand response. But I think there's still a gap in how it's actually being implemented on those levels.
Amazing. Thank you. Last question to Mark.
I'm going to join the parade of tenured professors who are the ones who seem to be asking all the questions. There could be a pattern here. Mine was really going back to the driver question. I mean, I did an observation. I'm not sure we should treat wind as an exclusive land use, but that's another question. But I did wonder, does Ontario have a built-in advantage in the presence of the LDCs, who are the obvious potential DER aggregators? I mean, you've got a ready-made, they're already running the distribution systems. They're already managing interfaces with the bulk system already. So that so I wonder, is it going to be easier in Ontario with those intermediaries relative to provinces that have fully vertically integrated systems like BC or Quebec, who don't have an intermediary to undertake those kinds of functions around DERs?
That might have been a comment or a suggestion rather than a question.
Question two is, how well does this, is this likely to work better, or you have local distribution utilities present versus vertically integrated monopoly systems?
I would say absolutely. On top of that, I know I'm proud of the ISO running a lot of successful DER, like those energy efficiency programs, but we get a lot of support from LDCs and other stakeholders to make that possible.
All right. That seems like a perfect place to break for lunch. We're only 1 minute and 30 seconds over. Yeah. So join me in thanking panel number 6.
Yes, thank you so much for that great session. That was wonderful. So yes, we'll now break for lunch, and I'd like to once again extend special thanks to Dunsky, our hospitality sponsor, and to Esmia Navias, our gold sponsors, as well as Carleton University for their continued support and contribution to this year's forum. So a quick reminder, this is your last chance to vote for your favorite poster. So the voting pool will close at 1:15. And at that point, we'll return for the poster pitch competition, at which point we'll open up the voting poll, the voting for the second award, the poster pitch competition. And for those pitching posters, please join us back next to the podium at 1:05 p.m. And yes, enjoy your lunch, and please don't miss this afternoon session. It will be great. Thank you so much.